for the longest time, I remember you'd hear lift heavy or lift big or go home or something like that. I mean, you know,
Go heavy or go home.
yeah, that's it. Like, what does the science say about that? Like, you've really contributed to this area about do you need to train heavy to get your gains?
So this is an area that I've done pretty much so I've changed my opinion on it. So many things that I had learned as an up and coming sports scientist, and that were treated as dogma, in textbooks. That my views have, in certain respects, done 180, and nothing can be characterized more so than loading. So I had always thought that if you're doing anything over 12 to 15 repetitions, it's basically glorified cardio, and that it's just muscle endurance. You're not going to gain muscle. The literature is now compellingly shown. There's so much literature on the topic. Our lab has done quite a bit of research as well as many others. And it shows that you can gain similar amounts of muscle, regardless of the loading, across a wide range of loading spectrums, up to 30 to even 40 repetitions, which is that's a long set. And that's at the whole muscle level. Now there may be, and I want to really emphasize, this is still equivocal. There may be some muscle fiber type specific benefits to doing light loads for type 1 fibers and type 2 fibers for heavy loads. If you're asking me my confidence in that literature, it's modest at best. But I can't rule out that would be the case. But when you're looking, let's say, at MRI data or ultrasound, which we've used extensively, really shows no difference. And I'll tell you what I think is a quite funny story looking back. But Stu Phillips had published a study circa 2012, and he went on social media, it was Facebook at the time, and it was on untrained subjects doing leg extensions. And it showed that there was no difference in whole muscle hypertrophy between 30% 1RM, which is like 30 reps, versus 80% 1RM, which was like 8 reps. And I remember it as clear as day saying, still, come on, this is untrained subjects doing leg extensions. They get jacked from doing spin cycling. That was, I think, my exact quote. And I said, I'm going to do this study in trained individuals. You're going to see there's going to be no question the older individuals are going to need the heavier loads to get those highest threshold motor units, the type 2 fibers, into play. And lo and behold, I carried out that study and no difference. It was really ate crow. And since then, there's just been so much evidence, not only just across the spectrum of populations, untrained, trained, older, younger, men, women. Really, any and every population has been extensively studied. And it really is a beautiful thing because it provides so much flexibility and options to carry out resistance training. And it's particularly, I think, beneficial for issues like training through injuries. So if you're training through injuries, heavy loading can be contraindicated. And also particularly for the older individuals, because joint-related issues, as you know, as people get older, they get osteoarthritis and other joint-related issues where heavy loading can be very uncomfortable for them and perhaps debilitating. And so it's kind of contraindicated. And they can use lighter loads. Now, the caveat to this is that the lighter loads have to be taken with a high degree of effort. So they have to really, if you do not extensively challenge your muscles, meaning that the last few reps are difficult to complete, you're not going to achieve gains. So when I talk about light loads, it's not this, taking pink dumbbells and just, doing some lifting. Okay, I stop. You must challenge the muscle. So when you lift heavier, just innately you're going to challenge the muscles regardless because the weight is already heavy. With lighter loads, the first number of repetitions are very easy to complete. And if it's easy to complete, you're really not doing much for challenging. And this goes back to a survival mechanism. So the reason that the body, I think this is important, because the reason that the body adapts to strength training is survival. The reason that the body adapts to anything is through a survival mechanism. And if you are not challenging it in a way it is not accustomed to being challenged, it has no impetus to adapt. So the reason that you will get these adaptations in strength and power and hypertrophy, muscle endurance, bone density, et cetera, is because the muscles and bones, et cetera, tendons, ligaments are being challenged beyond their present capacity.
And so as you get stronger, then you have to push past that and challenge them more. So the big take home for lifting lighter, which is what I tend to do, is to get fatigued, right, when you're doing it. And so it often means more reps, which I enjoy doing. I've done both, and I do find for me, I like doing the lighter lifting and more reps versus doing heavier and fewer reps. And I also notice I'm less likely to injure my wrist if I'm doing now, maybe that wouldn't, if I was doing things like proper form and all that, maybe it wouldn't be such an issue. But you mentioned the muscle type 1 and type 2 fibers, and maybe there's some evidence that lifting a little heavier might help shift a little bit more type 2. Can you talk just for a moment, like what are the roles of those types of fibers, and should people aim to kind of gain both of those, or are there distinct differences, in terms of with aging, their roles in aging?
Yeah. So great questions. So I'll tackle the second question first. So yes, aging is mostly specific. So when I say aging, what's called sarcopenia, which is the age-related loss of muscle, is most specific to the type 2 fibers, which are your strength-related fibers. So just to kind of even circle back, for those who don't know, type 1 fibers are endurance-oriented fibers. They do not produce force as well as type 2 fibers, but they're indefatigable. They can go on for longer periods of time. They're hard to fatigue. Whereas your type 2 fibers fatigue relatively easily, but they have the capacity to produce greater force. As you age, the type 1 fibers are more well preserved, where the type 2 fibers, there's even what's called apoptosis, which has been shown there's a loss of fibers, but certainly there's a diminishment where the fibers get smaller and smaller. It's more specific. The sarcopenic effect is more specific to the type 2 fibers, which is obviously problematic because the ability to produce force is where your primary functional capacity, at least from being able to open cans and jars, avoiding falls, etc. Circling back, so then the training effect, I want to emphasize, you're going to train, if you are training hard, regardless of heavy, light, you're going to be targeting both 1 and 2 fibers. So we're talking now nuance. So if you're I think this is where this kind of gets lost in context, where I think this would have the greatest, if it is in fact true, greatest relevance would be to, let's say, bodybuilders who want to maximize their muscle development. It probably is beneficial to utilize some heavier training and some lighter training so that you at least make sure you're kind of hedging your bets and make sure that you're maximizing development of all fibers. For the average individual, if you are training hard, regardless of light or heavy, you're going to be getting type 1 and type 2 fiber development. And it's been well documented that light load training does target the type 2 fibers, which that was one of the myths. It used to be taught when I was an up-and-coming sports scientist that if you just used light loads, you would not activate the highest threshold motor units, which are associated with these type 2 fibers. And thus, you would not optimize your strength and power and hypertrophy.